Today, we're going to be talking about all about API and LTI integrations. I am your first presenter. My name is Brian Bork, and I'm here with our readiness team as well as some of our sales and marketing team. And I'm joined by my co-presenter, Jane Solis, who will be by a little bit later to cover a couple of topics. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in and get started on this wonderful topic, talking about the Learn on Demand Systems API and LTI integrations. Now, we're going to take a quick look at what API and LTI mean, and then we're going to talk about how API and LTI work with Lab on Demand, and then we're going to talk about which gives you access to your lab content. And then Jane is going to help you with exploring the API and LTI in the training management system, or TMS, talking about how you access users and classes and courses and things like that. So we're going to be making a clear distinction between the two platforms within our organization, but the common thread will be the way you're accessing this content, which is through either API or LTI. So some quick definitions here. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is a set of lists of operations, and we often refer to them as calls or commands that you can use. And above and beyond the specific operations, they also have descriptions of what information you can glean from a various operation. There are all sorts of parameters and things like that you can do this. But what all of this boils down to is that you can use API, your front end, the code that you write, can access our LOD, or Lab on Demand, and or TMS platforms, and that will give you the capability of being able to access the labs through LOD, or courses, classes, users, and so on in the TMS. Your code makes the calls to our services. We return the results, which then your code will again use to provide lab content or reporting or whatever your call is. So I like to think of API as a little bit like a tunnel connecting two things. It maybe you're connecting two different states on one side of the tunnel and then on the other side of the tunnel. But in this particular case, you're going to have your program on one side of the tunnel, and then you'll send your data through that tunnel. And I use this a lot when I describe VPNs, but it's not a literal tunnel, but it's more of a theoretical tunnel that this API is how we're going to access the other side of that tunnel, or the code that we need to get. And that tunnel is established through what is known as a key exchange. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So I'm going to use an actual example here. And this is a customer who wanted to be able to do something a little bit differently than how it normally is done. For example, they wanted to be able to search for user subscriptions within the TMS. Those user subscriptions are normally the subscriptions were normally a collection, and then you had to go parse that collection and get user accounts or get information out of it. Instead, what they wanted to see is they wanted to see subscriptions based on the user information they sent. So they used a search subscription memberships API call and other calls. I don't want to make it out to be that's the only one that they use, to see if a custom field, which was user ID, had any current subscriptions. And then they used another API call in order to take that information that they got back and either cancel or change the subscription based on the information that they retained. So this gave the users the ability to be able to, through the API, and by the way, this was through the TMS API, to be able to go in, look at a set of subscriptions that were based on a user, and then be able to change those in order to make sure that the subscription stayed up to date based on that user. So that's an example of, and a fairly sophisticated example of how they did that. Now, the codes that they used and the calls that they made and the results they got returned, all of that is much more in depth than what this webinar is intended to be. But I do want to let you know that API programming is a series of tests. Let's see if this works, and let's see if I can get this result back. But it's all about coding a front end. Now, that doesn't mean that's the only way you can do things. You could also, if you want to do things a little bit more simplistic, and or I should say, a little bit more simplified, but still powerful, you have the Learning Tools Interoperability Toolset, or LTI. This is a standard that was developed by the IMS Global Learning Consortium, which is a tough series of words to put together. But this allows courseware and learning tools from different vendors to be launched from a tool within an application. Now, most of you know LTI through the use of a sort of a well-known set of tools like Canvas, Moodle, Blackboard, OpenEdX. There's all sorts of both open source and proprietary tools that are out there that functions as an LMS, or learning management system. This is where you build your collection of activities, whether it's courseware from one location, or SCORM content from another location, or maybe some videos from another location. And of course, you can use your lab content or your users and courses and classes from within the TMS. So we've got both. You have the ability to access your content in Learn on Demand systems through LTI. So you get your link from your TMS to the activities in Learn on Demand systems, and you get the results back to your LMS through the LTI communication. It's really all about the fact that this is all a form of API. The lab content in Lab on Demand, so all of your launch buttons, all of your instructions, all of your virtual machines and cloud credential or cloud slice technology and so on, that's all in the back end. And then you pick your own front end. They're all publishing points. So you could use LTI 1.1 or 1.3. Now, I should also mention there is a specification which is LTI 1.2, but LTI 1.2 and 1.1 are considered the same. They use the same tool set. 1.3 uses a slightly different tool set. You can use API coding, your front end, and then the lab content on the back end. Or you could use the TMS, and believe it or not, the TMS is just a form of being a publishing point. Now, we will make that publishing point available to you, and when we do that, that's how you set up that tunnel that I was talking about. That publishing point has a key. That key is what you use to access that content through that tunnel. All right. So it's all a form of API. Remember, your lab content is inside of Lab on Demand, and then you use these different publishing points. So what do these publishing points look like, and how do we make this happen? Let's take a look at API and LTI in Lab on Demand. So here is an example of, well, first of all, I should make sure that we have the documentation for you. And the documentation is here online and available for you. You'll see content about this at the end of our presentation in the resources slide. But we have a full set of documentation, and this documentation is vital for you to know what sort of commands or calls you can make. And you can see the commands listed here. And then when you go into a command, and one of the most popular would be the launch command. When you go into a command, you can see the parameters that you can send, or have to send through, and then what responses you might get back. And then in every single command, you get a sample of what it would look like. It is not meant to be an identical. This isn't what you type in order to get this. It is meant to show you what the syntax will typically look like. So here is an example of a URL request that you would make in order to get a lab to launch. And you can see in here that we've got our call to launch, and then we've got some of our parameters here. And then this is the response that you get. Notice this response includes a URL for the actual launch. Now you would take that URL that you get back as a response. You would use that URL, you'd parse it out of the response, and then you'd use that to give in an iframe or in some other application, you would give them that URL and it would give them the actual lab interface. So a lot of people think that by sending this out that you're going, just taking this, oops, there we go, taking this information and putting it into a web browser, that you're going to get a launch. And that's not true. You're going to get a response, and that response will have other information besides just the URL. You're also going to get some other things like whether or not there was any errors and what they were, what your lab instance ID is, and so on. All of that information is needed as well. And depending on what parameters you pass, you may get more or less information back. So that's all our API documentation. It's all there for you, and it's relatively straightforward as far as what you need to do. Now, of course, you need to understand how to make that call through your program, and then what to do with that content when you come back. So in order for us to even allow you to make those calls of the different commands we're talking about, you need to have what is called an API key. And sorry, I've got that's what I was looking for. In order to make an API call, you need to have an API key. Now, you don't generate that key. We generate that key for you. And then we establish that your API is going to be set up for your organization so that you can use it. So when you say, hey, I would like to use the API either to your account executive or your technical account engineer, if you say, I'd like to use the API, they're going to go in and they're going to generate this key by using a tool that we have internally. I've got an example here of the key that we generate. Now, you notice that by default, these keys do not display. And I'll flash it up here real quick, but you see that the number is a very simple, easy to use number. It's a long key, but it's not like it is hundreds of characters long. It's only a few characters long. And there is a way for us to copy it and give it to you. Now, you'll notice that we have in our example here, we have a key for our API, and then we also have a key for LTI. Now, this is one interesting setup that we have, and that gives us the ability to use one publishing point, and this publishing point is called the Brian B. Associates Sample API, and it allows us to have two different ways of accessing it. But we can use this API interface in order to, what am I getting at here? We can use this key for just API, and then we can have a separate key. Let me bring that up. Where is that? Hold on one second. My machine is, there we go. Here's the LTI. And the LTI interface has its own set of keys. Now, we have two different publishing points here. So we have two different tunnels. One has a setup for API and the other has a setup for LTI. So how do you use that as a lab developer? You don't have the access to be able to create these keys. We create them for you. But the cool part about this is once you've got the key and are able to make up the calls either through LTI or API, you then have the ability to use that publishing point very, very quickly and very easily. So let's say that I have a lab series here. Now, it's just a simple example. You'll see there's no content in here right now. But I want to set this up so that at any point, this lab series is going to be usable in a production environment through either API or LTI. So what I can do is I can go in, and this is something you can do as a lab editor, go in and edit, go to the publish point, or the publish tab, excuse me, and click on API consumer. Now you will only see the consumers that are available to your organization. And you can see here that I have access to my sample API and my sample LTI, as well as a couple of others like Career Rocket and the LODS training management system. Your mileage will vary. You will see some out there that are a little bit, you may have a few more or a few less publishing points. But I'm just going to choose the API right now. Actually, you know what? I'm going to choose both the API and LTI. And I'm going to click on OK. And now I save this lab series. And once I do this, any content that I put in here, if I add a lab profile, if I make a copy of a lab profile, will be available to be accessed through either the API or the LTI tunnel, quote unquote, that we have set up. But I need to make those calls using the commands that we talked about and using the front end system. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, what do I do for LTI? API's got those calls, but LTI doesn't have calls set up. So how do I access it with LTI? Well, if you go in and look at any lab profile and you scroll down, you will see a launch URL that will automatically be there when you create the lab profile. And here's an example of what one looks like. If you put this into a properly set up LMS or a LTI application, and you put it in there as a link to your lab content, when your students or end users are using that LMS, they'll have a launch button. They can click on launch and they will get their lab through Lab on Demand. So with all of that said, and I realize that was sort of a whirlwind look, I am going to ask my co-presenter, Jane, if she is ready to take over and show you a little bit about API and LTI and TMS.
I will do so. Hello. And let me find my screen to share. Here we go. So API and LTI in LOD are all about you getting labs into another platform. And the TMS, as Brian said, is a recipient of the LOD API. So our API and LTI are all about, our API is all about getting information into the system in our platform from another source or pulling reporting out of that. And then LTI is about being able to set up another platform's source activities inside of a course in the TMS. So what do we need for a TMS API to work? I'll first say, just as Brian showed you, you need to have a key from us. You'll also want to become familiar with our documentation, which we'll be giving you a reference to at the end, and this can be reached from any, you don't have to be logged in to get to it. And again, we have all of our commands and items that you need to put in order to get your calls back. And our API is written and it allows us to add new response fields without you making any updates. For your API calls to work consistently, you need to write your API client implementation to ignore any fields you are not using in your code. This allows the implementation to be stable while the API is dynamic. So what can you do with our API in the TMS? You can set up single sign-on so that users can log into your platform and automatically be logged into the TMS and not have to sign in twice. You can go to the API for updates. So you can create, update, or delete many items like users, organizations, enrollments, course assignments, subscriptions, companies. You can create or update classes. You can update passwords and custom fields for users and classes. You can add and remove user roles or organization management on user accounts. And you can close user accounts. You can pull API reporting for a lot of different things, and I've listed a few here: users, user roles, sign-in history, user activity, where they've been inside the TMS, organizations, your courses, course feedback, class enrollments, classes, class assignments, lab instances are an important one, and subscriptions, survey results, companies, some other things like that. So that's my big piece of API right there for you. LTI, in order to use LTI in the TMS, it allows you to add LTI activities into your courses. First, you have to create a provider. Then you have to create an LTI resource link to link back to that activity in the other platform or website, and then you add it as a course activity. So let's take a look. We have an LTI tile right here for those of you interested in using it. And the first thing that you need to do is add a provider. I'm just going to look at one instead of creating a new one. So you'll put in a name for that provider, what organization it's for. And just like Brian was showing you in the in LOD, you're going to have an LTI key and then a secret that you're going to input from your other platform. And then you're going to set what availability it has here in the system. Then the next piece you're going to put in is our activity, our resource. So again, you're going to name it. You can describe what it is. I'm pulling this over from LOD. You're going to input that provider that we just had over here that we just created or edited, and then you're going to pull that URL for the LTI resource link. And once you have that, you can add it into a course. So I have my course here. I can edit and go to my activities. And we have the add LTI resource link. I'm going to find one whole result here and click OK. And that adds the activity. So it's there to launch when a user is in that activity. They can just click on it and open that activity up. Anyway, and it would launch that lab for us. So that is the summary of LTI within the TMS. Let's go back and wrap up. If I can get to the right place. Whoops. Oh, hey, we already did that. We have resources for you. So if you want to learn more about our API and LTI, we have a whole resource list at lods.one/API-LTI. Next week, we have another webinar, and we have a lot of webinars that you can check out in our archive. Next week, it'll be proving that coders can code. So sounds like we're setting up challenges for coders there, and that you can register and look at our archive at lods.one/feature demos. And we do, in fact, want to hear from you. If you have product ideas, anything in LOD or the TMS that you're looking at and going, yeah, this should work this way, or why don't you have this? Go to lods.one/feedback and leave your idea there, and you can vote on other ideas that other people have added. You can join us on Slack at labauthor.slack.com, and you can review us on G2 and tell other people what you think of us at lods.one/review us. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any questions, you can type them into the question chat, and we are here to answer those for you. And we thank you for attending today.